What took place behind the scenes? Why would a popular wildlife show hosted by one of the most respected people in wildlife TV all of a sudden go away? We're going to talk about the river monster story that hasn't been told for years. This story could change the way you remember the show forever. He caught all the monsters there were. River Monsters didn't end because it was getting boring. It didn't end because of drama or fights at the network. No, the reason was much less common and strangely fulfilling. Monster hunting became a worldwide obsession because of Jeremy Wade. He caught everything there was to catch. Most shows try to fit too many things into one season just to stay alive. River Monsters did something that not many shows do. It ended at the top, not because it had to, but because its job was done. The man who ran everything didn't just host a show. Most people would have given up on a challenge they had been working on their whole lives before the first season even aired. River Monsters was different from the start. It wasn't just a fishing show. The book was a mix of an adventure series, a detective story, and an animal thriller. But there was a bigger plan behind every huge pull on the fishing line. Jeremy Wade had made a mental list of legendary, often made-up freshwater creatures that had been a part of local legends for decades, scared river towns, and piqued the interest of scientists. These were things that lived in the dark. There are dangerous arapaimas the size of small cars, the famous Goliath tiger fish with its rows of sharp teeth, and giant catfish that are thought to have drowned villagers. Following these creatures one by one started out as a positive idea, but it quickly turned into something much more intense. Wade crossed off another name on his list each season. Some took years, some took months. One of his white whales was the Goliath tiger fish. He looked for it for more than 20 years. And when he did in season 2, it wasn't just a catch. It was an event that made him who he was. People watched as the seasons went on and saw Wade go through the Congo, the Amazon, the slopes of the Himalayas, and the swamps of Southeast Asia. And WDE's goals grew as the show's popularity did. He wasn't happy with simple leads or stories from other people. Every fish had to have a deep ecological meaning, a mystery, or a fear. There were a lot at stake, and the stories were true. It was exciting on screen, but there was a quiet reality behind it all. Less people were on the list. With each new season, there were fewer and fewer monsters that fit the show's original premise. And when the last season ran in 2017, everyone saw the truth, not just Wade. For the network too. The show River Monsters wasn't really cancelled by Animal Planet. In fact, they were happy about it. Executives praised Jeremy Wade's unmatched ability to keep people's attention and turn scientific questions into exciting stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. There was also the fact that River Monsters was based on finding legends, and those stories were gone. In a press release, Wade made it very clear. 10 years ago, I made a list of things I wanted to do that seemed too big to be possible. Now, I've crossed everything off the list and then some. The reason for the show's end was one of the strangest ever. A lot of the shows begged the networks to give them one more season. Wade stopped running because he had nothing more to show. He had stood up to the most feared freshwater predators, brought them out into the open, and told their stories in an honest and moving way. For fans, it was both good and bad. They had more to have. They knew Wade had done something very special, though. He didn't get turned down. He won. Fans thought that was the last time they would see WDE until they found out what he went through behind the scenes. What's really going on behind the scenes? What River Monsters didn't always show was how much Jeremy Wade gave up to make each episode happen. People saw the finished product, which included clear shots of murky rivers, the catch, and narration that mixed folklore and science. But that polished version often hid a process that was hard, dangerous, and never-ending. Wade wasn't just battling fish that were hard to catch, though. He had to deal with some of the worst conditions on Earth. He also got scars along the way that weren't always physical. Wade shot in places that not many people would have gone. These weren't typical wildlife hotspots or places where tourists go. They were faraway jungles, unmarked riverbanks, and politically unstable areas where it was hard to get help and strangers were rare. Wade often spent days getting to these places, sometimes on foot and sometimes in flimsy dugout boats, carrying camera gear, fishing gear, and survival supplies through thick vegetation and stuffy air. There were no trailers, comforts, or quick routes. The show did a good job of building suspense, but it didn't always show how dangerous things really were. Wade got malaria more than once while they were filming. In one interview, he said that he had passed out from being in the hot sun for hours on end. People got bug bites that swelled up to the size of tennis balls, got tropical infections that could have been fatal, and slept in mosquito net tents at night while animals howled and it was too hot to breathe. The places were both beautiful and harsh. Maybe the scariest parts were the ones where there was no help. Wade and his team often did their jobs without getting medical help right away. They could have died with just one wrong move, a slip on wet rocks, a bite from the wrong bug, or a run-in with a protective crocodile. Wade later said that there were times when he really thought the show wasn't worth it. But he kept going because he was obsessed with writing about species that people had either forgotten, ignored, or misread. It wasn't just bad for their bodies either. It became more and more difficult to deal with over time. Wade was more worn out than he let on during the show's run after being alone for weeks and having to deal with new cultures, languages, dangers, and demands all the time. He had to be a host, a biologist, an explorer, and the leader of a small group of people, all while making sure the finished footage met the high standards of the show. That kind of stress, especially when combined with being tired, left its mark. But Wade didn't talk about any of this much when the cameras were rolling. He kept the story about the myths, the fish, and the people. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. Part of what made river monsters so strong was how humble they were. Wade slowly started to open up after the show was over, though. He talked about how hard those years had been in interviews and public appearances. How all the traveling, being outside, and not getting enough rest hurt his health. It gave people their first look at how much he had been through in secret for almost 10 years. Now that we look back, we can see that Wade's River Monsters was more than just a TV show. It was a full contact, years-long dedication that pushed him to his limits. From the outside, the adventure looked exciting, and it was. But behind every great catch was a man who had just made it through another week in a world that was often dangerous and uncertain. Still, that wasn't what ended River Monsters in the end. Wade was beat up, but not broken. He was still determined to keep going. What he learned next, though, would change everything. It had nothing to do with numbers, staying alive, or the grind of making shows. There was one quiet truth that they couldn't get around. But danger wasn't the real reason the show had to end. The next thing that came out was even stranger. The list of monsters was real and full. The outside of River Monsters looked like it would never end. There are so many rivers, fish, and local tales that it seems like there will never be enough to go around. Jeremy Wade, on the other hand, says that the show was never meant to go on forever. It was sent on a very clear mission, and that mission had a finish line. For a long time before the first show aired, Wade made a mental list of the world's most mysterious, scary, and legendary freshwater animals. These were not only rare species, but also fish that were linked to myths and were often misunderstood or feared by people in the area. Other ones had escaped scientists and been linked to deaths. Not only were they catches, they were also stories. The story had to be more than just a fish in the water for River Monsters to make an episode. There had to be a secret, a myth, and a way to hide. The show was built around that list. Over the course of 9 seasons, Wade searched for and eventually found every animal on it, from the Goliath tiger fish in the Congo to the Arapima in the Amazon. Each season brought viewers one step closer to finishing the journey. There were catfish the size of grown men and snakehead fish that scared whole villages. And in the end, it was done quietly, completely, and there was nothing left open. Wade didn't want to make things take too long. He was aware of what happens when shows stay too long. People stop being interested. The stories aren't as good. And in the case of River Monsters, the show's main attraction, the mystery, would fade. It was clear. If the creature didn't really scare people or have an interesting story, it wasn't worth an episode. He wouldn't make new seasons with filler episodes or old fish just to keep the cameras rolling. Rather, he did something that almost no one on TV ever does: he made a choice. He decided to end the show while it was still well liked. He insisted on finishing it in an honest way. Wade and the rest of the Animal Planet team didn't water down the brand. Instead, they made the last season a celebration of all they had done. They didn't just tie up any loose ends. They told some of the biggest stories they've ever told. There was more to River Monsters last season than just a bunch of shows. It was a well-planned send-off. Wade went back to some of the most memorable places from earlier seasons to give them more meaning and closure. He also went after long-rumored aquatic threats, such as a mysterious sea monster in uncharted waters and a group of creatures from coral reefs that were said to have attacked and killed people in Indonesia. These were new ideas, not old ones. They were the last pieces of the puzzle that were left. But as the last fish was pulled from the water, Wade's farewell wasn't really about the animals anymore. It was about something deeper, almost holy. In reality, River Monsters was no longer just a show. A rare mix of adventure, education, and pure awe, it was a sign. Wade also knew that the symbol would fade if the task went on without it. He kept it safe by ending it. Wade cared more about the honesty of River Monsters than about exposure. That choice, which was based on finishing instead of falling apart, is part of what made the show famous today. The monsters were caught, the myths were looked into, and the mystery was given a chance to rest instead of being sucked dry. That wasn't the last twist, though. Because Jeremy Wade did something that not many people thought he would do when the show ended. There was no pitch for a reboot. He didn't give her the reins. He didn't even take the offers that came his way. Wade's last goodbye wasn't just about fish, though. It was about keeping something even more holy safe. Why Wade turned down a remake or spin-off? These days, not many things can end on a happy note in the entertainment world. When a popular show ends, everyone in the business works hard to bring it back. There are a lot of spin-offs, sequels, reboots, and new ideas on the market. So it was the same with River Monsters and The Temptation. The show was one of Animal Planet's most popular ever, after all. It had fans all over the world, a well-known host, and a format that was easy to copy. That's what they thought. But Jeremy Wade didn't want to add to a story that was already complete. He told them no when they asked him to. There were, in fact, talks going on behind the scenes. Executives at the network knew that River Monsters were still valuable. They talked about ideas. There could be a new show with different hosts, a spin-off show about ocean predators, or a series like Legacy, where Wade teaches someone to take his place. He didn't feel right about any of it, though. He heard, but said no. Wade always saw River Monsters as more than just a show about big fish that it had to do with secrets, stress, and the truth. And to try to restart that magic just to keep it going would have been to betray what it was all about. It wasn't pride that drove WDE to say no. It was a matter of principle. He was afraid of what he called selling out the idea. He worked hard to keep the tone serious, the science correct, and the message clear throughout the first series. There is a mix of conservation, instruction, and real adventure in River Monsters. All of the stories were based on real-life dangers, local myths, and care for the environment. He thought that making that into a flashy reality TV show with over-the-top stunts or acted-out fights would make everything they'd worked on seem cheap. Being able to tell when to stop is a skill. Wade used that strength while being fully aware of it. He didn't try to get bigger deals or fame, instead he took a back seat and let River Monsters speak for itself. He only wanted the last season to be that, the last season. Not any cliffhangers or handoffs, just an end. Moving in this way makes me think of another famous TV goodbye. As a clear sign that this story was over, Michael Landon blew up the whole town of Walnut Grove at the end of Little House on the Prairie. Even though Jeremy Wade didn't need explosives, his choice to leave was just as brave. He didn't want someone else to take over River Monsters and change it so that it was no longer recognizable. The show was really about you. His voice, his beliefs, and his vision were shown in every episode. It was like letting a stranger redo his life's work to let it go on without him. Some fans were sad that River Monsters wouldn't come back in a different form, but a lot of people admired Wade for it. In a time when most media properties are reused over and over, his choice stood out. It was a quiet refusal to give in, a way to protect the show's integrity, since it had always been about going deeper, not longer. Wade did more than just protect a TV show. He looked out for a heritage that was built on bravery, curiosity, and discipline. That legacy wasn't something he was ready to give up for more airtime or money. He had spent almost 10 years telling stories that no one else could tell, about creatures that most people had never heard of. He did it with a real sense of awe. He didn't look back when it was over. Before fans could fully understand and accept his choice, Wade told them something else, a part of the story that hadn't been shown on the show. He had mostly kept quiet about what happened for years. But now, for the first time, he felt free to talk. And what he said next shocked even his most devoted fans. And fans were shocked again when Jeremy Wade told the truth. The finally broke his silence was Jeremy Wade. Fans have wondered for years what the real reason was for Monsters' end. Was it tiredness, low numbers, or politics at the network? Most of the time, Jeremy Wade had been quiet. He did not go on a farewell tour or send out dramatic press statements. After the show was over, he was no longer visible. Wade started to open up, though, as time went on. What he told me added a whole new level to the story. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't an issue. It was truthful. It was stronger than any theory fans had come up with in its own way. During a series of calm, deep interviews, Wade began to think about River Monsters with a sense of calm finality. It was his way of saying that he had done everything he had planned. The show was based on tracking down strange animals that lived in freshwater and were said to have scared locals, started rumors, and eluded scientists. But those riddles were over by the 9th season. Some TV shows never end. Wade said that ours couldn't. He wasn't saying it because he was upset. Neither was he angry or upset. He even seemed proud. To Wade, the show's original goal was to search, reveal, and demystify, and he thought it would be dishonest to keep going after that goal was met. To keep the cameras running, it would have been simple to change the format, make up new threats, or start hunting less interesting species. Wade didn't want to lie, though. Honestly, he cared about the people there too much to lie to them. He quit because he felt responsible to the people who watched the show, the animals, and the idea behind the show. Wade said that going on would have made him feel like betraying what River Monsters stood for. It was never about flashy entertainment or fake drama on the show. It was about mysteries and finding out things. It was the right thing to do to let go of that world when there was nothing more to discovery there. Wade still wanted to look around, though. Not even close. He understood that his interest had not gone away after reading River Monsters, it had just changed. Instead of going after specific fish, he started to care more about the health of the ecosystems those fish relied on. That's how his next show, Mighty Rivers, came to be. This time, Wade looked into the world's most important waterways to find out what was killing them, what could save them, and how people were changing some of the planet's most important lifelines. Then there were mysteries of the deep, which were bigger than the unexplained things that happened underwater. It gave Wade access to even more stories and essays, from cities that sank to the strangest creatures. All of them still had Wade's signature approach of cautious skepticism, deep study, and a complete commitment to the truth. He used a different lens to look at things with the same energy, story, and scientific interest that made River Monsters a hit. One important thing that these projects showed was that Jeremy Wade wasn't just a one-show wonder. He told stories for a reason. He wasn't someone who was after fame. He was a man looking for answers. He could have turned river monsters into a commercial that would never end, but he chose to be honest. Punctured after a few years. This proved once again why the show touched so many people. The story was never over the top, and he didn't need razzmatazz exits to let the truth stand out. However, that was only the start of what fans realized as he went into new areas. River Monsters is no longer being made by Jeremy Wade, but the spirit of this tough adventure and the search for the unknown lives on in everything he does. But don't think Wade slowed down after River Monsters. What Wade did following the show. Some fans thought that after almost a decade of fighting dangerous animals and going to the ends of the earth on River Monsters, Jeremy Wade would step back from the spotlight. He had every right to step back. It didn't happen that way. Wade didn't slow down. He changed gears. He started working on new projects almost right away, using the hard-earned skills he had gained to help a bigger cause. If River Monsters was about finding the truth behind myths, his new book would be about finding the truth behind a much more urgent threat, the destruction of the places where those monsters lived. Mighty Rivers, WDE's first project after River Monsters, turned things around. He wasn't looking for mythical beasts this time. He was trying to figure out what was hurting the rivers. Each episode was about a big river like the Amazon, the Mississippi, or the Danube that used to be full of life but was now showing scary signs of going downhill. These great rivers were not what they used to be because they were polluted, overfished, and changed by people. Wade, who had been observing things for years, became both the storyteller and the investigator. Mighty Rivers showed Wade's more thoughtful and hurried side. No longer was it just about the thrill of the chase. It was about figuring out what comes next after the chase. What happens when the monsters are gone? They're gone not because they've been caught, but because their homes can't survive without them. This wasn't just a question for Wade. He had been there and seen the changes. It was eerie how empty rivers were that they used to be full of life. Some of the places he saw in River Monsters had changed in scary ways since then. It wasn't just telling stories anymore. It was a warning. Then came the series Mysteries of the Deep, which gave him even more freedom. Wade looked into the unexplained for this project. Lost towns under the sea, ships that have sunk, and strange things seen in the water. The format was less strict and the canvas was bigger, but he still did things the same way. A sense of wonder without exaggeration. He wasn't making things up. He looked into it. The calm, realistic way WDE told the story stood out in a genre that is often full of exaggeration. He was known as a straight shooter, which made even the craziest stories seem serious and not just a way to get attention. With views about the great rivers and mysteries of the deep, WDE's love for nature became more visible and went beyond River Monsters. WDE made the choice to use his public platform to speak out about endangered species, habitats that are disappearing, and the delicate balance that keeps freshwater ecosystems going. This was a direct result of his growing passion for conservation. It was easy to understand. These rivers are more than just places to film or use as backgrounds. They protect millions of people, animals, and cultures, but they are also in danger. Wade knew that for many viewers, he was the first time they had seen these animals and seen this area. That was important. So he didn't fade away, instead, he took on that responsibility. He started to work with environmental groups more closely and wrote and spoke at educational events about how important it is to protect waterways. He turned into more than just a host. He became a lawyer. And this may have been the most important discovery. The work that WDE did after River Monsters wasn't different from the original show. It was the next chapter that made sense. Because River Monsters wasn't just about scary fish at its core. It had to do with respect. Respect nature, mystery, and the thin line that separates growth for people and survival for the environment. That message was always there, but it was often hidden by the fun. It turns out that this bigger goal has always been what River Monsters was all about. What river monsters are really trying to do. River Monsters looked like a show about big fish at first glance. It had all the elements of a TV thrill ride, a mystery, danger, suspense, and faraway places. However, people who paid close attention started to see something more than just the heart-pounding times and scary stories. There was a steady, quiet message that got stronger as the seasons changed. Jeremy Wade was after more than just monsters. He was taking away fear. He had a class. Most of all, he wanted people to see the wild world and its animals, especially the ones that people don't understand, in a new way. Wade has talked about how River Monsters was never just about the catch. Yes, catching a 200-pound catfish or a tiger fish with sharp teeth made for exciting TV. But the main part of each episode wasn't the fight at the end with the rod and line. It was the trip to learn what people were scared of. Wade talked to every legend with two questions from the start. What is this thing? Why does it scare people so much? The show became more than just a hunt because of those questions. They went on a psychological journey that helped them get to the bottom of rumors, myths, and misunderstandings. Wade found over and over that the animals people were most afraid of were often the ones who were being blamed the most wrongly. What people thought was a fish that ate people turned out to be one that ate bones. For decades, the name of a slayer species had been wrong, and each time the truth came out, something changed in the crowd. What used to be fear became interest. It went from disgust to respect. People started to understand that these monsters weren't really bad guys. They were survivors, products of their surroundings, and important parts of ecosystems that are very complicated. The second reason for making River Monsters was then slowly exposed. Each episode taught us something different about protecting the environment. Wade made the bigger problem of environmental decline more personal by focusing on specific species. Even though most people had never